Hi, this is Georgie Kovacs with Fempower Health. I'm really excited to share with you that on July 17th, the FDA held a long overdue hearing on menopause. And whether you are a woman in midlife, if you are a healthcare provider, someone who is a loved one that is related to someone in midlife, this is for you. The reason why this hearing was initially held was because of a campaign led by the wonderful organization called Let's Talk Menopause, and it's under hashtag Unboxing Menopause. And it was really centered around the fact that vaginal estrogen, which is an incredibly important product to support women in this phase of life because of the hormone changes that lead to vaginal dryness, recurrent UTIs, pain with sex, and a number of other factors. Unfortunately, the label that is on that product is a Blackbox Warning, which is the strictest label that the FDA can put on a given product. And the concern by the experts is that this label is wrong. And because of it, it is scaring both physicians from prescribing it to patients, as well as patients from taking it. And some of the physicians even shared that they have seen loved ones throw out the prescriptions because they are afraid that their spouse or loved one will get cancer, heart attacks, you name it. And so this whole hearing was beyond vaginal estrogen because it was all around the misinformation that is around hormone therapy. Okay. So what I would like to do is give you a summary of what was covered. And I'll also share some things that I wish were covered that were not. What happened in the hearing, first of all, is the experts clearly got together to make sure that each of them covered specific bullet points because they each had 5 minutes. And they wanted to make sure that they covered the holistic aspect of women's health. And they did an incredible job. Before we dive in further, what I want to do is give background on why we are where we are today. So it all started in July 2002. And many of the experts really painted a picture of the PTSD they still experience because of what happened in July. So the reports from a long-term study, the Women's Health Initiative study, came out. And essentially, it shared that if women are on hormone therapy, they will get stroke, breast cancer, vascular disease, and many other factors. And this is not the case. So a quick summary is the original study was intended to better understand cardiovascular disease. But when you want to enroll in a clinical trial, you need to ensure that the clinical trial meets its endpoints and you want to make sure the right patients are brought in. But in order to have a double-blind trial, you need to have representative patients. And the people who have cardiovascular disease tend to be older, but those who get perimenopause are younger. And so the results came out, but they were really for older patients. So they didn't really give us the right information for people who are actually in perimenopause. And also the way the data was assessed wasn't really correct in the risk factors that are associated with taking hormone therapy. And so those were really the concerns. So let's talk about some of what was discussed because some of these doctors, like the quotes, unbelievable. So I highly recommend it. It's a 2-hour meeting, probably the best menopause education you will ever get. Really, really great summary. But I thought in case you don't have time or if you just want to get a quick summary, I will give you some of that information. Okay, so a few of the top voices, and I'm just going through my notes here just so I don't forget anything, but Dr. Barbara Levy is actually the one who had shared that she still has PTSD from 2002. And it's really sad because she iterated that patients were calling and they were throwing their hormones in the garbage, putting the pills down the toilet. It was just really, really scary. And I want you all to understand the impact of this because doctors were then not prescribing the medication. The patients were afraid. And then medical schools, because at the same time, they were also decreasing the number of hours that they had for residents to go in. It used to be 120 hours a week. It went down to 80. And so when you have less time, you have to cut certain things. And so clearly menopause training was cut. And so now we're recovering from that. The Menopause Society actually just got a $5 million grant. They're trying to match that. And a lot of other people are trying to do education. And that was a huge point of discussion in this hearing because we want to make sure that the physicians now are getting that education. And luckily, people are, because we're hearing so much about women in this phase of life who really, really do need care. The other thing that was pointed out, which is really, really important, is we can't rely on just the OBGYN. Internal medicine physicians and others can really, really support women in this stage of life. So we shouldn't look at OBGYNs to be the go-to for absolutely everything as it relates to women's health. And then Dr. Kelly Casperson, I know that she talks so much about testosterone, and some of the points that she made is there's really a lot of benefits for testosterone, and she's had even patients that get off antidepressants once they're on testosterone. Now, by the way, everything I'm sharing today, it is not medical advice. You have to talk to your doctor. You have to really understand what's going on for you to determine whether or not you need hormone therapy, and if so, which hormone therapy. I'm just giving you a summary of some of the key points that were shared, and you can again do a deep dive in the 2-hour discussion. Feel free to follow any of these physicians, but always make sure that you keep track of what's going on with you, share that with your doctor, and make sure you get the help that you need that is specific to you. Okay, back to testosterone. So it's really been helpful, but here's the issue with testosterone. There is not an FDA approved one in the United States for women. However, in other countries, there are approved doses. So what's happening is now the doctors are having to prescribe it off label. What was interesting is I heard mixed messages around whether or not it's covered by insurance or not, because that's a huge factor as well. But they were even citing how a lot of the male studies related to testosterone get approved within 6 months. And yet anyone who's been trying to go to the FDA for testosterone for women, they are constantly being told, get more data, get more data. I actually advise companies that are trying to also create testosterone to meet all of the guidelines that FDA says, well, you need to do this, this, and this for women. They build a product and then they have the FDA still saying, please do more studies. And so it's a real barrier. Luckily, there is testosterone, but it has to be microdosed. But are we really clear on what the actual dose should be? So that's why the testosterone discussion was brought up. And Dr. Vonda Wright, who has coined the term musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, she is an orthopedic surgeon, and she actually used to be a cancer nurse. So she really gets the full experience of healthcare. And she said that 1 in 2 women over 50 will suffer an osteoporotic fracture, and yet fewer than 5% are using hormone therapy to prevent it. And so she basically said, we're putting rods in the hips of women for fractures that estrogen could have prevented. Next up is vaginal estrogen. Dr. Simon did such an incredible job in how he spoke about the impact of vaginal estrogen. Let's talk about estrogen overall. Estrogen comes in different formulations, right? There's a cream that you can put on. There's, I think it's a gel, actually, a patch, a pill, and then there's vaginal estrogen. And the way that it is applied or taken has an impact on how it is absorbed and what it does for your body. It's mostly in 2 buckets where there's vaginal estrogen and everything else, but there's nuances obviously with the others. But vaginal estrogen is not systemically absorbed. Dr. Simon pointed out how even if you did blood work, like you couldn't measure the estrogen because it is not absorbed in the blood. And the concern, as I mentioned earlier, is that there's this black box warning. And another doctor shared stories how she would talk to her patients about cancer risk. These were cancer patients, and she would talk about all the risks and benefits of taking vaginal estrogen. And the patient would say, yep, I'm taking it. She would go home and the family member would see the package insert. And that is the description with all the stuff related to the product, the one that's like 8-point font. And it would have all the warnings. And then the loved one would see it. They would throw it away and said, it's not worth us having sex for you to possibly get cancer again. And this is a huge, huge problem, because what he pointed out is, if you're treating all estrogen alike, this is a problem, because now women who need something that could really, really help them and save their lives aren't getting the product that they need because it's mislabeled. It's not properly representing it. And he painted the picture. He said, okay, so if you're saying cardiovascular disease, breast cancer, and all of these things, I want you to understand that if we can't even measure it in the blood, and there actually is data, 400,000 women in the US and 100,000 in the EU, where they showed that when they're taking vaginal estrogen, they don't even see it in the endometrium, which is the uterine lining. And so if it's not even getting there, where that would probably be the first area of impact, then how is it getting to these other parts of the body? It can't. So you're now saying that vaginal estrogen that can't even get in the blood somehow magically does, and then possibly causes these things that now travel to your brain, breasts, uterus, etc. And so he said it's just not possible. He respected that the FDA has to really balance a lot of things when they're creating these labels, but this one is just outright not correct. And Dr. Rachel Rubin, who has done such an incredible job creating a huge following on social media for patients and doctors alike, shared a tragic story with her mom, where her mom was in the ICU, and I believe it was recurrent UTIs that she was suffering. It was like really, really serious, and she was getting all these infections. And Dr. Rubin, who is a urologist and trained in sexual health, was trying to help her mom. And thank goodness she's a doctor, but even all the hurdles that she and her family had to go through, she tells the story in greater detail in the FDA hearing notes. It was absolutely unbelievable. So imagine if you're someone who's not an expert in healthcare, who's not a doctor, trying to navigate something like this. Like, her mom could have died, and she really needed the vaginal estrogen to help her with one of the things that brought her into the ICU. And the thing is, there are recently new guidelines created for genitourinary syndrome of menopause, which vaginal estrogen can help. Now, there's other options like DHEA and others. I know when I posted on TikTok, some had said that they haven't been able to take vaginal estrogen because of reactions that they had had to their skin or whatnot, but that's for you and your doctors to sort through. But nonetheless, genitourinary syndrome of menopause, if you are taking a vaginal estrogen or DHEA, it can really prevent recurrent UTIs, helps with vaginal dryness, pain with sex, and so many other factors. So it has huge, huge benefits. And the new guidelines do outline all the questions anyone has, like about breast cancer risk and all of these other factors. So you should definitely take a look. But generally, the consensus amongst all the physicians that were presenting is vaginal estrogen is safe. And a lot of doctors, even who weren't on the panel, often say, like, once women hit their 40s, they just prescribe vaginal estrogen. Let's see what else. So those were the main points, I believe. So we talked about osteoporosis, estrogen, vaginal estrogen. So those are the main highlights, right? But then what was really interesting is they did not talk about progesterone. And just a quick reminder, progesterone, if you do have a uterus, does need to be taken because it will prevent against uterine cancer or endometrial cancer, which is really, really important. We definitely don't want to have that. The question that I have had all along is progestin versus progesterone. So if you look at the WHI study, even though the breast cancer risk was, not a significant one, there was a difference in the arm that took progesterone versus progestin. And not a lot of people are talking about this. And I've seen this discussion where it's okay if it's progestin. No, it should be progesterone that someone takes, right? Generally speaking. And others have said it's fine. And I've heard if you take birth control that has a progestin in it, then that is sufficient. And others have said, even if you're taking that, you should still take progesterone. And I would love for a clinician who sees this to please comment, because I would love to have that discussion. Because then there are other questions like if you're taking a hormonal IUD, because obviously if you're in perimenopause, your ovulation is not consistent and known. And so a lot of people will take like the IUD or a pill. And what is the dose of that relative to a progesterone, right? So the progesterone doses come in 100 milligram, 200, and then or 300, I think, is the max dose, therapeutic dose. And again, I would love for anyone out there to please correct me and validate or share links to studies in the comments. I greatly appreciate it. But that was one of the things that was not discussed that I wish would have been. But let's face it, the testosterone and estrogen discussion really, really needed to be had. We needed, based on how much time the FDA gave the panelists, they did the right call to focus on estrogen and testosterone. But I do hope at some point we get a lot more clarity around progesterone, because at least this is my question. Maybe the doctors don't have the question, but I certainly do. So many people are going to be posting about this, and I'm really excited about it because we need everyone talking about it. 4 years ago on the podcast, I started interviewing people on menopause, and most people didn't even know what it was. And about, I would say 2 years ago, I started to see the bit of an explosion on the conversation. And now everyone's talking about it. Everyone's writing books, et cetera. And it's wonderful. But what I want to really share is how important it is to look at this whole picture of what happened here with menopause and broadly women's health. Because to really look, we need to look at the complete picture, because I also see a lot of people that were posting, oh, pharma did this, and the FDA did that, and the doctors did that. So let me explain all the pieces that have to fit for the healthcare system to really work. So we need researchers who study how diseases actually show up in women. So these can be diseases that, or conditions or life stages, like menopause is not a disease, it's a life stage, but there are diseases that are at greater risk because of this stage of life. But we need to understand, if it's diseases that show up in women alone, or differently or disproportionately, we need to understand them. And then we need clinical trials that include women, not just as afterthoughts, but as part of the process. And obviously, if it's a disease that impacts only women, we just need to make sure that they're studied right, but that they are studied. But then we need the regulatory bodies to really understand these conditions deeply so that when the drug approvals come, they are approving it from the right perspective. Then we also need payers to reimburse the treatments that work. And we obviously need proper ICD-9 codes to address these women's health conditions so that payers know exactly what they're reimbursing. And then we need clinicians who are trained, not just improvising because they have a small toolbox to play with. We need them to be trained and we need them to have the right tools. And then we need patients who can advocate for themselves, and the media that goes beyond the headlines and does the hard work of explaining the full picture. That is the formula. And it is not about blaming any one player. It is all these players need to do the right thing for the healthcare system to work, and especially for women. If you found this helpful, please do subscribe for more information on women's health. And you can also follow the newsletter. I send that out once a week. Thank you so much again for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. Have a wonderful day.